There we go.
Thank you. Come on in, grab a seat. Unusual for going to chairs. If anyone wants to still come in,
No, just come in, yeah. We never know where we're going.
hello, thank you very much for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Deb. I am a therapist, that's what I do for a living. At the same time, so I have been doing it a long time, about 50,000 hours worth of, that's what I've been doing. It's been a long time, and I've done about, I don't know, I've got an MSc, an MBA, a normal degree, and about 8.5 postgrads. Keep thinking about going a bit further, but probably not. So much learning to do, isn't there? It never ends. Come on in if you want. There are a couple of seats. I've been in the in an alternative. Come in if you want. You might not be able to sit together. That's fine. Oh, you might. Very kind of you. So we're a bit close now. Should we do first names just in case? So, I've been in kink lifestyle, submissive lifestyle. I am submissive since I was 17, so I'm 57 in 2 weeks. So it's quite a long time, 40 years. And I've been active in the scene, out of the scene, back in the scene. It's really varied. And about 7 years ago, the idea was that we would put one of these on, see how it went, do one or two, and then fade them down as they got less popular. Hasn't happened yet, which is cool. Come in, beautiful. Hello.
Just a couple of chairs, yeah.
There's one there, one there.
Sorry, two there. Thank you. You didn't realise you'd signed up for a game of like chairs or something. Okay, so the idea of these workshops is because I can talk about anything that's related to kink, I can talk about anything that's related to polyamory, I can talk about anything that's related to relationships, I can talk about anything that's related to mental health, well-being, history, genetics, epigenetics. You haven't got a Jerry, so there aren't that many of you.
Thank you. Bingo!
A few of them are really noisy and take the piss, so let's just exclude them. I mentioned some things fairly commonly, that's why, so they play word things. And I also run a free workshop every other Thursday night as well, that's also free for people to come along to. If you are a professional and you write to me afterwards, you can claim this as an hour's CPD. It's really fucking worth doing if this is your field, because an hour's worth of CPD will cost you 60 quid anywhere else. So that's really worth doing, and I will give you a proper certificate. The same as if you come every other Thursday night, that's 2 hours. 2 hours now, I think I'll do 2 hours. Because these things get popular and start talking, that's why we've extended this one today as well. The idea of these is that you ask the questions, I answer. It can be really slow at the beginning because everyone doesn't want to ask a question. And then we get to the end and everyone wants to ask a question. So that happens a lot as well. Also, feel free to follow me if you are on FetLife. It's just the kink shrink. It is a piss take of a name. I don't claim anything from it or by it. There was a review a couple of months ago from about LAMv online. Somebody, has got a big blog all about kink and alternatives, and said this older woman, fuck off, can't take it to my head. There are some single seats if you want to grab any, one in front of the other and one there, sorry. So this person turned around and said, this older woman came on and dared to call herself the kink shrink. What the fuck does she know, type thing. And then very kindly swallowed their words and said, fuck me, I learned a lot. So that was quite nice. And they wrote quite a lot about what they'd done in the workshop rather than anywhere else, so I felt very touched by that. Apart from the old woman comment. Older woman, sorry. Right, so, but it's true, isn't it? So, who here has been in kink or poly or alternative lifestyle for around 5 years? Under 5 years? Okay, so it's a real mix. Over 10 years? Over 15? Over 30? 40?
You won, bitch! Yes, you win again.
It's a joke. It really is a joke. There is a chair there. There is two chairs at the back there if you want to squeeze in. No musical chairs, sorry. There is one seat there.
Saved to one person.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, sorry.
There's one
There's
there.
another one there. Sorry. So the idea of these is you ask the questions. What you will do, funny enough, is grab me afterwards and then say, let's ask you this. But this is a learning environment for all of us, and me as well. Like, people have amazing things to share, life experience, shit that we've done. We all know we're all experts in ourselves. And we often go to therapy or we go somewhere and we think, oh, this person's going to fix me, which is just such a fucking load of bollocks. You don't have that expectation of any form of therapy. You have to be ready to do that. And if you want it, it's really hard work. And I see a lot of clients every week. I really do. I work hard at what I do. And if someone comes in and says, can you fix me? And we're in an equal relationship, I'm like, no, we're not. Because I'm like a dominatrix right now because you've got me up here and expect me to fix you, and that's not going to happen. So the idea about this is that it's all about kink, as I say, poly mental health. So who has a question that they would like to start us off with, and then the ball will just start rolling? Over to you.
So I've recently started taking up like knife play.
Okay.
And I'm not quite sure about the rules about it and how to sort of like go about it. Like, because I've experienced it with my partner, and I guess I just want to learn a bit more about what is knife play.
Okay. Anyone here play with knives? What's the one golden rule you would say about knives?
Leave them alive at the end. That's always good.
Look, ironically,
If things do go wrong.
So, do you know first aid? If you don't, anyone here play at all with any form of instrument, any form of breath play, any form of slapping, hitting, punching? Anyone do any of that? Are you all first aid qualified?
fucking yeah. Yes.
Some of us are actually professionals. If not, please do that as the first thing that you do. And I really mean that. I know how to resuscitate somebody. I know how to fix a wound. I've even got, damp wound dressings at my home with a proper dressing that's over it. There is one in the front there. Is there another chair that we can bring around or something?
I can sit on the floor.
You sure?
Yeah.
You're going to have a very only feeling after a while, I'll tell you. So the one thing I'd say is please make sure that you understand some kind of first aid. Because it's all well and good going into these things. When I'm the one, because I'm the submissive, I'm the slave, I'm the bottom. If I experience that, I can't fucking do anything for myself. It's no good if I'm qualified. I want you to have some idea of what to do. I also want you to have an idea of a plan of if you were to cut somebody open, what is your next step? So what we're going to do here is we're going to pre-mortem, bingo, we're going to pre-mortem all the ideas that could happen so we have a solution for each of them. The first ones we start with are safety and consent. So let's start with safety. So safety comes around first aid. What are you going to do? Make sure your phones are charged. I know that sounds utterly ridiculous, and be aware that you're going to have to phone 999. You are going to potentially have to get an ambulance. What's your story? What are you going to say? What are you going to say on the phone? What are you going to say to the people? I stabbed them. I cut them open. We really need to think about what we're going to say and how we're going to explain what we're doing. Most people, most of the time, are fucking marvellous about what we do. I've had police involvement, hospital involvement. I'm honestly quite safe. I've had a bit of everything from being stalked to all sorts of things. And the police have been absolutely fantastic with me when I say, I'm a very active kinkster. I'm on the scene. I do all of this. They've been really good, and you will always find one utter cunt because that's real life. What I hope is you don't get to speak to them. However, you might. So have a plan. What are you going to say? What does it look like? What does it mean? And I bet you didn't think you was going to start there. But I bet you thought this. I didn't think she was going to start there, but this is where we start. We start with safety. So first aid. Do you know some first aid? Know your physiology. Know where things are in the body. When we do things like piercings and we start with knives, how deep you cut is really important. A lot of people who don't know about piercing or about knives like to go in. Don't go in, because if you go in and then across, you don't know what you've hit. I remember hearing stories. I remember being at clubs. I've been in places where people do things along the lines of, but I stuck the needle in and I think it might be in the wrong place. Don't take it out. Do not take it out. Because if you have hit something, you pull, you've opened a wound. you're much better off going to the hospital, or if you've got a minor injuries clinic around you, you can also go there. But however, most of the stuff we do is at night, not always, but it is at night often. So one of those minor injury clinics is not going to be open. So you end up calling an ambulance or you take that person into the hospital. Don't take it out. I mean, knifing isn't about stabbing, is it? So that's very different as well. But I'm just going to go through every possible incident, accident, or whatever. Plus, what somebody could have, especially with knives, is a very interesting psychological reaction. Massive freezing when it comes to knives. And this is going to sound ridiculous, and I don't know if you fall under the same premise. Have your knives sharp, not blunt. If your knife is... This is a personal question. Just answer it in your head. Do not put your hands up. If anyone here is self-harmed or self-injured at all in their lives, what we tend to do, or what people tend to do, is they keep their instruments, they get blunter and blunter and blunter, so they try harder and harder and harder and harder. And then if you swap your instrument and you've then got something sharp, you've now got a very serious problem. Know first aid, know about cleaning up, know about making sure that the area is clean if you are going to cut at all. However, most of knife play isn't actually about cutting, it's about fear. Most of knife play is about fear. You can do really effective things if you want to with very blunt knives, which are not going to cut or scratch or scrape with, by putting them in the freezer. If you put a knife in a freezer and it looks very sharp, and you hold it to someone's throat or arm or leg and you run it across, it feels like a cut because it is freezing cold. It's quite shocking.
Yeah, I learned a trick from someone that was doing knife play that the sub gets blindfolded first, and then the butter knife goes in the ice cube.
Yes. So you can use
like they're bleeding
yeah.
as well.
So yes, it's really clever to do things like that. So you can play with liquids and fluids, of course. You can play with colours, you can play with fake blood, you can do all sorts of stuff. If anyone here feels like they're going to have a panic attack by the words, just let me know. Let me know your name fairly quickly as well, and I'll get that sorted. So we can play. Knife play is more about fear, so it is mainly psychological. It is often about force. It is often about an attack. It is often about a power exchange of fighting almost. However, if you have a sharp knife, do not fight with it. I mean, it sounds really basic. Don't fight with it. If the person is struggling or moving and they're not okay, I would never do knife play on a first date unless I knew what the other person's responses were going to be like. If they are a struggler and I put a knife over their breast and they move, I've just sliced twice, and they're slices I didn't mean to make. Does that make sense? Please check with somebody how they are psychologically. Are they likely, do they have anxiety? Do they have stress? Do they have panic attacks? Anyone know how to get someone out of a panic attack? Learn. If you're going to play with psychological fear, I wrote about this the other day. I said I'm going to coin a new phrase called poly and BDSM light, with a little trademark LITE. A lot of us are doing poly and BDSM light, which is great. Let's fucking have a great time. Screw who you want, love who you want, make sure you're safe for you, play how you want. When we start playing a little more with this stuff, we need a little more negotiation, a little more conversation, and a little less lust. Just fucking do it to me. Well, no, fuck, I didn't mean that. But just fucking, yeah, I know, just do what you want. No, but not that and that. And actually, this person might also be saying, well, I don't want to do that to you. I don't feel comfortable with what I'm about to do. Consent goes a ways. I'm also going to turn around and say, consent doesn't exist. What are you talking about? Right, I write about consent. I've got a really big piece. I teach consent all the time. I'm a massive fan of consent. At the end of the day, what I'm going to argue is you cannot possibly consent to what's about to happen because you don't fucking know. You do not know the consequences of what you're about to do. I didn't know 20 years ago if somebody kept punching me, because I like being punched. I like ultra-violence. I didn't know that it would split my verses. I didn't know that would cause me trouble internally after 10, 15 years of doing it. I didn't know that that meant that I would need steroid shots eventually. Would you know that? We don't know till we know. So we are consenting to what we think is going to happen. We are consenting on some agreed boundaries and limits. We are consenting to what we know. You can't consent to what you don't know. And you don't always know how you're going to react to a knife. If somebody says, well, let's do some knife play, you might be imagining that little knife that's lovely. They get out a fucking great big machete or something. You've got a very different response, potentially. If they get out their butter knife, even if they don't know it, but if it's like I say to when I work a lot of people around self-injury, please don't pick the kitchen knife. Have a set of knives that you play with that are separate because they've got different bacteria, different uses, different reasons. If you just go in and pick up your steak knife, is that, I rinsed down some boiling water. I'm still not sure. It's got a different feel to it. So the responses, we don't know. And what we need is a long conversation. So if we're getting to knife play, what I'd ask anyone who is into knife play, what do you want to get from it? Do you know what you want to get from it?
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay. Can you share, or would you rather not hear?
Yeah, I don't mind sharing. So I got out of a lot of abusive. I got out of an abusive relationship, and basically like my current partner now, who's very knowledgeable in the clinical health and very good health and safety is like top thing. Like as you say, like
Care.
He's got all the he's got his box with all the medical stuff and all the
Cool.
and so what I get out of it is a sense that I'm freely giving consent to playing like that. Whereas before I didn't get a choice. So it's that sort of feeling of like.
So you're playing with power by
Exactly,
reclaiming
playing with
power.
and also it's a sense of sort of like I like the feeling of pain basically. Yeah.
So I'm going to say something probably contentious, maybe a little offensive. I'm well known for this. Please be careful long term. When we start playing with power, it's because we reclaim power. And some of us swing out like it was cradle to here, which is fine. But then we don't always know deep down the sort of psychological responses we're going to have. Because as much as we consent and say, yes, this is what's going to happen in this scene, this will be great. If something doesn't go quite the way you saw it in your head, or something goes slightly wrong, somebody ties a rope that doesn't feel right, somebody cuts a place that doesn't feel right, because we've sort of said this, haven't we? I thought that was in it. You don't always know. So in that moment, what happens is you see a lot of consensual, non-consent form of play in BDSM. You see a lot of rape play in BDSM, especially for people who have experienced some form of sexual assault. I like to reclaim my power. Let's go for this. Let's do this. Great. You might end up seeing someone like me because it could trigger PTSD. It could trigger something. Please be careful. Do you see that? What do you see?
Love that.
Yeah. So it's uncomfortable. So we have to just be aware that when something goes slightly wrong, it might make us feel even more disempowered. So just be aware of that tiny caveat as you're doing all of this, because we can't always say that we're not going to respond. We don't know how we're going to respond. If I said to you, how would you respond if you were assaulted? You might turn and say, I'll fucking punch him, or I'll do this, or I'll say this, or I'll do that. The problem is when you have a response that's physiological, that comes from that part of the brain, you have no choice. It's fight, flight, freeze. It's also friend, fuck, flop, foe, fawn. There are 7 to 8 different forms of response that we now know. Fawning means you just go ahead with whatever is happening to you. A little bit like people maybe used to call that a Stockholm syndrome. It doesn't exist, but that principle. I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes. And people do that in relationships as well. I mean, I've certainly done that way too often. Sure, I don't really want to. Sure. And a lot of us do. If we even do it in everyday sex. Come on, let's do it tonight. Yay. Or we're halfway through it thinking, I hate this. I'm fucking bored. This is dreadful. I'll just let them finish. Should we? I don't think we should. However, it's easier to let people do that than it is to say, I'm out, actually. You're terrible. Quite hard to say, isn't it? But Jesus, never do that brutal. That's a horrific thing to do. But if it's not going well for us, we do need to educate our partners. We do need to talk. We need to have some kind of communication. I have this argument all the time about orgasms, especially for people who have vaginas. If you think that 70% roughly of vagina owners do not come through penetration, Well, the penis owners and other vagina owners I talk to clearly don't know that fact. Because they think everyone they've been with, so we lie. And that isn't good for all of us. That isn't good for the rest of us. It's shit. Let's not lie. Let's communicate. Let's say, no, seriously, that doesn't work for me. Or if someone's touching your clitoris or your cock and it's not working for you, we educate them. And it's the same with knives. It's all about going very slow, starting low. When you do it with somebody else, go back to the beginning again, always. All the negotiations that we have to do. So freezing works really well. A sharp knife works really well. If you like cutting, please be aware, if you are any form of self-harmer, self-abuser, which is absolutely okay as well, please tell the person who's topping you that you're having some kind of self-injury by proxy going on. So at least they're aware of what they're consenting to as well. Which sounds a bit dramatic, but if you need it, and this is what you like, and it gives you a release, and then a fucking pandemic happens, and you can't be with that person, you're not going to get the same release. So be aware of your own behaviours and why you do what you do, and how and what you want from the other person. Does that make sense? Please make sure you know what you're doing around blood. Please make sure you know what you're doing around cleanliness around blood and hygiene around blood and care if you are going to cut. Do you have some stitches with you in case? I don't mean a fucking needle and thread. Please don't do that. You're not qualified. However, there are really good basic things you can do to help clean up. There are things that you can buy. There are sprays that you can pour on. There's saline that you can pour on to clean it out. Once the skin is dry, there are little stick-on stitches that you can use to hold something together. And please be aware if you do start using knives and you do start cutting, lying down and standing up have very different forces of gravity. So you think that's a small cut, you stand up and your whole tit hits the floor. But it was fine when you were lying down. You know? Is it a bit heavy?
Amber.
So was my tit in it.
On that note, also be mindful of the way that the body works, and I know that this is very weird to say out loud, but if I was to cut my arm horizontally, I can approach the edges very easily because that's the way that the tension on the body works. If I cut it vertically, my arm will spill open. So I
So
could
be
get
aware when you're
far
cutting
more
and how.
shit to do that needs possibly surgery, that is far more care and far more intention.
So please be aware of
There's
this
loads of ways. Just go online, look for like tension on your body,
physiology.
Then
Look up biology.
learn how to cut, basically.
It is, and it sounds silly, but there are also workshops. So, like for example, at the LAMv retreat coming up, there is somebody. They're going to be specifically talking about piercing and how to and what to and how the body works. Those workshops are rare to get because we're not allowed to do them anywhere because they contain piercing or other things. So if you get an opportunity to go to a workshop like that, grab it, especially if you want to do this sort of thing. Right, let's go to a different topic and change the scene a little bit.
So,
I'll come back to you, I promise.
hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm Latinx, and a lot of my sort of BIPOC friends who are also into kink, we talk a lot about fetishization online, particularly.
Of colour, of
Yes.
race, of creed,
Yeah,
of
exactly.
religion, of
Yeah.
so Nazi, black slave, white master, they're the most common, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or like even just on the dating scene, just regularly like that.
Big black cock.
The gray, yeah,
BBC,
the gray
yeah.
line between like being adored and being exoticized. So I wonder if you've had those kinds of conversations.
Oh, I have a lot of opinions on this one.
So it's not gonna be popular.
I'm very opinionated about this sort of thing. I am. I can't stand even meeting someone who says to me, Deb, I'm really into satin, wear a satin blouse. Fuck off, you don't want me in a blouse, you want a blouse on me. That means you don't like me and you don't want me, you like the blouse on me. So that's not about me, it's not about me as a human being. And if you want a cock because it's black and glorious and large, you don't respect the person that owns that fucking cock. That is about a human being. I really have a problem. However, I'm also going to say, over the years, this has been a serious amount of fetish. It's been a fetish since you even go back into slavery, many moons ago. The owned slaves of when you go back to America, if you look at the history of the fetishization of this sort of thing, it was a fetish, but it also comes from slavery. Do we have a right to be doing that now? I don't think so anymore. But if that person really wants that and they are the person Let's say they are BIPOC, let's say they are, I'm a Jewish woman. Do I want a man in a Nazi uniform getting me to crawl on the floor on my hands and knees? The argument, when we have this argument, becomes, but if I want it, it's fine. Is it? What's it creating? Is it private? How does that work? So you've got to really think about the implication of what you're doing there. There is a real fetishization of people for what they've got, for what they look like, for the colour of their skin, for their age. I've got a real mummy fetish. I don't care. I don't care. That's your fetish. Go and find someone else who's got the same one. Don't put it on me. Oh, can you teach me? I get that one a lot. No, I don't want to. What's in it for me? Well, you know, I'm young, I've got a great cock. I know you think you have, sweetheart. Oh. We know these things, don't we? Is it right? This is about a new conversation which has happened in the last 10 to 20 years. And I say new because in the scheme of history, it's a new fucking conversation. In the scheme of history, if we're trying to undo hundreds of years of inequality, we can't fix it in 5 years, we can't fix it in 10. We can make it better. We can create situations, actually, even now, which is crazy, by, bingo a little bit, the epigenetics. We absolutely, the experience that you have as a human being changes the experience of a human being in 200 to 300 years to come. By the experiences that you have as a human being makes a difference. If you're trying to change the patriarchy, if you're trying to change racism, inequality, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, anti-anything, let's go for all of them, the changes you're making now will make a difference probably in 100 or 150 years. Unfortunately, not now. They'll make small differences. We're fighting for something for the other people's future, not for ours, if that makes sense. It's not going to be in my lifetime. If you think about sex and women, there's a really good example. I was born in 1965. My mum is Swiss. So my mum is Swiss, my dad has Polish and Russian hair. I'm fucking Heinz 57, I am. My mum converted to Judaism to marry my dad. Hitler would definitely guess me. That's my heritage now. Even though my mum was Germanic as such, no way. That's who I am. And my dad's genes are me. My sister and I both got breast cancer. And actually Jewish male genes carry an awful lot of breast cancer. You look surprised at that, absolutely.
Yeah, that was interesting.
It is. If you look at the history of it, there is depending on the sort of Jewish history you have, because there are 2 or 3 forms of tribes, major tribes, you have to be careful, you have to look. So that's more likely to be in your genes, potentially. We haven't told my dad that, I think he'd be really upset. So we haven't told him that. Mind you, I do think he's getting a bit old. Maybe I should just mention it. My mum died last year. I think he's going to live forever. It's going to be a nightmare. So we have to think about these things. We do. So that's a big deal. I like him. I adored my mum. I like my dad. So I think it's a big issue. Where are you coming from with it? What's your opinion on it?
I mean, it's really an open question. Because I think,
Yeah.
You do want to be loved for who you are, and part of that is maybe what you look like or where you come from or your background in general. But there's a difference between being drawn to someone for the whole package and then just making it a thing. Because I think that it turns the situation from being safe to suddenly very unsafe.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like more it's like duty of care as a friend to someone else who's into kink or anything else to sort of point that out if you feel like maybe it's kind of weird because you're like trying maybe not to also butt in when you're wanted, but also if you feel like the situation is abusive, you feel like you want to protect people around you who get into abusive situations.
There's a big difference between abuse and toxicity. So toxicity is when people are out of control, abuse is when people are in control. So toxicity comes from anger, reaction to people not getting on, and it increases and it changes. Whereas abuse is, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do, and you are not okay. There's a real difference in the feeling to those. When we look at Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, 2 very toxic people really getting absolutely lost in a mess, and it's just all really sad, isn't it? It's really sad that 2 human beings have just fucked each other's lives up quite a lot. And there is some abuse in there as well, actually, so there's different reasons. Anyone else got an opinion on that question? What do you think about that question? Because this is one we don't like to talk about. See, when we start talking about fetish, we think it's all fun. We think it's all lovely, isn't it? I'm going to stick my cock or my hand in that mouth. I'm going to do all of this. I'm going to do all of that. And then actually, there is a more serious element to what we're doing. If you keep abusing someone emotionally, if you start talking to people in such a way that there is lots of humiliation coming in, you could do some damage to their sense of self if you don't know how to build them back up afterwards. I like being called a worthless, fat, fucking loose whore. Anyone a little shocked at that? Anyone would go, ooh, no. Some people go, oh, how damaging is that? I like that sort of stuff. I really like heavy humiliation and abuse. I also happen to be a cut queen, which helps. Because if she, he, they don't give a shit who they are, because I'm queer, so it doesn't matter who this person is. I love the fact that they find someone different to me and then point out all of my faults. If you don't have a good sense of self and you have your faults pointed out continuously, that is long-term abuse. That's how children are damaged. You're worthless, you're pathetic, you're whatever. Keep going with that. It has an impact. So everything we do has an impact. So it's always worth checking in and making sure that the other person's okay. I think the world is changing, certainly in my lifetime. I mean, you know, I'm 57 in 2 weeks, as I said. The world has drastically changed in that time. When I was talking about sex, even for vagina owners, the sexual liberation, the freedom of sex for women then as were, female women, I understand we're changing over time, but I'm talking about what was then. My God, it's very different to today, even. That liberation of, well, you can sleep with who you want. You can have sex where you want. You won't be ostracized, but it's still only under 100 years old. It's under 100 years old. So it won't be till my children and my children's children start to feel liberated from that, because we still have opinions on somebody who is fat, somebody who is tall, somebody who is small, somebody who is skinny, somebody who has coloured hair. They're all fucking weird, those women with coloured hair. Jesus, they're not sane. I mean, that said a lot, isn't it? Sorry to everyone who's got coloured hair. There's a lot of insult around that. We make these incredible opinions if somebody is Jewish, if somebody is Muslim, if somebody is black, white, if somebody, oh my God, we have opinions straight away. So we've got to look at that. Especially because I'm not racist. Got a black friend. Okay. Have you ever looked at your opinions? Have you ever looked at how you feel? I'm not anti-Semitic. I know a couple of Jews. Went to synagogue once. It's quite cool. Okay. So we need to look into ourselves, especially over these sort of things. And what we need to have is the conversations around them. Even if we don't like them, even if they're uncomfortable, even if we don't make any conclusion, we need to start having the conversations. What do you think about that as a group? Do you think these conversations should be had? They're hard though, aren't they? Because someone has an opinion that you don't agree with, but the point of ethical, good communication is that you can talk to another human being and have the conversation. That's the start of something. That's what makes a difference. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, because I don't think it's fully answerable in the society that we live in at the moment. I know where I hope it goes. And I think abuse is about intent. I know I personally do not want to be fetishized for what I am or what I wear. I want you to want me if I'm wearing my granny pants and my toweling robe as much as if I've got a corset on. If me just dressing up in my corset is the only thing that does it for you, no, it's just not going to work. So if we're fetishized for our clothes, for our skin colour, for our age, for anything else as well, long term, does that mean you can have a great relationship with that person? Oh, I don't know. My answer is probably not. Not long term. It doesn't carry on working because it's the fetishization that matters. Oh, put your heels on when we go to bed. Well, every time? Got a water mattress, that's a serious problem, isn't it? Puncture on with that. All those things. I don't. Dressing up, I'm a little bit boring like this. I'm really sorry. I'm sure some of you into latex, rubber, leather, and all the beautiful things that you can wear. Oh my God, that's such an effort. Yeah, I'm a bit too tired most nights. Oh, can you get dressed up in the full latex? Are you kidding me? It takes so long to put that shit on. Can we just play while I'm naked? Can I keep the socks on? That's the truth of it, long term. It really is. So I think it's a really good discussion to have. I don't think there's an answer to it. And I think you have to ask each person involved, because there's a big change on the fetish scene about it, saying, hey, can we change some of these words? Like big black cock, can we not use that? How about we just say big cock? But there again, is that fair on people with smaller cocks? And it just keeps going and going and going and going. However, when we put race, when we put religion, when we put colour, when we put other things into it, it's not for me. It's not for me, but that's a personal opinion. And it's different for everybody. And I guess I would hope that eventually people will come to that opinion eventually. Do I want somebody? Nazi uniforms aren't allowed anymore in most places most of the time. Do I want somebody in a Nazi uniform? For me, as a woman of Jewish heritage, when I know that I had ancestors come over, I say ancestors, 3 generations, but who absolutely escaped from pogroms, met on an onion boat, such an I like my history, had their names changed when they came to England because they didn't have the right names. So they were given the name Fieldstein, and then my grandparents changed that to Fields because it was too Jewish, because the amount of shit that they got for all of that. And I still had that shit growing up. I got one of the last people in, as a 6-year-old, this lad was being really horrible to my sister. You Jewish fucking horrible whatever, really going for her, and she wore glasses and really, really going. I got that motherfucker with cane, I'll tell you. I wasn't having it even as a 6-year-old. It's a little bit awkward when I was going out with someone and we went to a party and it turns out one of his best friends, that was her uncle, and he was there. Hi Graham, how are you? I fucking remember you got me the cane. Yes, because you were a cunt. As a 6-year-old. So, but things have changed, like corporal punishment. Again, something else that's changed, the way we bring up children. Everything is changing. Good and bad consequences. Do I think, there are also arguments, especially when we look at anyone who is BIPOC as well. So when we look at that, what you've also got is internalized and taught racism as well. Some people say, no, I really like that as a fetish. So does that person like it as a fetish, or is it years of conditioning? How do we know? I would argue, anyone here submissive? Anyone here dominant? Anyone not really sure yet? Anyone switch? Anyone into poly? The argument is more and more, there's much more evidence for this nowadays, is that you are born that way. You have epigenetic transgenerational scripting that tells you that this is very likely to happen for you. And then your environment carries it on. So we could argue the same for you, that this is just something you always meant to be. It wasn't even a free choice. If you really want to go down that genetic sort of route, it's quite interesting, isn't it? It's like, no, it's completely my choice. I choose this. It's interesting. Do we fully, or is it our environment that creates this? When you look back before, when you look at people like serial killers, there was a very well-known professor who used to talk about serial killers all the time, started doing all the research, fMRI brain scans. This person's a serial killer. Can you see this is why? They were born this way. Look at this pattern on this fMRI. He did some research into his own family who were having terrible trouble with Alzheimer's. Or was it Parkinson's? I can't remember. I have to read the research again. Dropped the scans, picked them all up, put them together, goes to his next university lecture, because he's one of the world-renowned leading people on this kind of forensic interest when it comes to serial killers, and said, this person's brain, look, so if you look at, fuck, that's my name. It's his own brain. And this is a really well-known, he had to change everything that he thought. He had to change his whole approach. And he's also the person that found, there's a very interesting gene as well, which is known as the violent gene, that actually mainly men have, cis-born men, and most of the prison population of cis-born men have this particular gene. So a propensity to violence. So genes are really fucking interesting when we start to get into them. Is it us? Is it our history? And environment makes a difference. And he knew that he was pretty unempathic sometimes. He wasn't the most sympathetic person to others, and he was aware of his behaviour. So when he had to relook at everything, he had to, I just need to rethink my whole life now. Who am I? What does this mean? How can I be kinder? How can I be nicer? And it changed for him. So, is that internalized for some people? And then if that's okay, if we're not hurting anybody else and we're doing something in our bedrooms, does it matter? Good question. And that's what we base consent on, isn't it? We are both consenting adults, so it doesn't matter. That's what consent basically says. You're not hurting anyone else. We're not doing it on High Street. You didn't do it over the Queen's Jubilee, Queen's Queen. You didn't. So it's something, it's an interesting discussion. It's a long-term discussion. You had a question.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to thank you, like, for bringing up the question and for you for answering that question. I have my own lots of opinions about that, but
Yeah, me too. But
my topic is different. I was sort of wondering about like the use of kink to manage let's say symptoms of neurodivergence and poor like mental health in a therapeutic sense, and I wanted to hear your thoughts like as like someone with a lot of experience, like not just with kink and with therapy, and particularly how it pertains to people who like aren't currently in therapy or aren't currently like under any sort of other like type of treatment for like, you know, psychiatric brain stuff.
So neurodivergent is a word that's mainly used for people who are on the autistic spectrum. However, it's now become much more generalized. It was, now it's not so much anymore. Anybody who maybe has any form of autism, Asperger's as it used to be called, ASD. It might also be people that have mental health issues. It might be somebody with a diagnosis. It might be somebody with ADHD or ADD, depending on what country you're from. They're all called different things, and they've all got different rules and regulations as to how they work and what they are. So neurodivergence is actually quite a big term nowadays. It's if you, neurotypical, typical. Is that normal? Oh, normal is an interesting word, isn't it? So you've got a neurotypical brain, you've got a neurodivergent brain. The argument more and more is there are way more people with neurodivergency of some kind, in some way, shape or form. You could argue that that's anxiety, stress, all sorts of different things. Using it as a treatment is interesting. So what you'll find is some research online that advocates that we can, it's going to come back to the knife question a little bit, I'm afraid. Oh, watch 300 followers disappear. So, can this be really good for this sort of thing? Yes. But it's the how and the who with. And it's the expectations. A lot of scenes and a lot of power exchange relationships, and a lot of this stuff goes wrong because of our expectations. I thought this was going to happen. I hoped that would happen. It didn't. It's the same with relationships, isn't it? You have hopes and expectations as to what that person's going to do with you, for you, around you, and how it works. But unless you learn to communicate those needs, that's the problem. Now, on average, somebody who is a higher end of the spectrum of neurodivergency and somebody who is neurotypical could potentially have communication problems. Depending on the neurodivergence, because this is the problem, it so depends. Can I read emotions? Do I understand what relationships look like? Can I see what's going on for that person in their face? Can I understand? Do I have empathy? What if I don't? So what we need is to teach each other how we communicate. Now, I think two neurotypical people need to do that for a start. I think everyone needs to do it. Our messages that are given to us as kids, the way we communicate, is said, this is how you communicate. Well, that's like shit, isn't it? Because you meet other people who communicate in a completely different way. So we have to think again. How would you say that? Can I understand that? What's happening for you there? What does that mean when I say that? It means this. Well, fuck me, I thought it meant this. When I work with couples or polycules or thruples, and let's say they're having relationship problems, one of the first things we do is we start talking about words. What does that word mean to you? Well, I mean fidelity. I know what the fucking dictionary says about fidelity. I don't know what it means to you as a human being. Tell me. It means this. Really? Oh, gosh. And even their partners are, does it? I didn't know that. Yet we agree to these things like marriage vows and all sorts of different things, or hand fasting, or living together. Who here works for a living who is employed by somebody else? Did you sign a contract? Have you read every single part of that contract? Look how many people have said no. Like the proportion is lower. Do you remember every part of that contract as to how it impacts you every day? Some do, some don't. Now, ironically, somebody who's more neurodivergent might remember every single part of it, depending on their memory and how it works. Logic. Especially if we're going to talk about anyone on the spectrum when it comes to ASD. Some are extremely logical, and this is the problem with neurodivergence. You all think you know what it means. You don't. I don't. When somebody comes into my therapy room and says, I've got a diagnosis of ADHD, I've got a diagnosis of this, and I've got a diagnosis of that. That's it. No. Tell me, what's that like for you? This. I was just talking to somebody who had bariatric surgery recently, which is bypass, which means they're going to lose an awful lot of weight in a very short period of time. And we were talking about the impacts of that sort of surgery, and every single person's is different. You're right. You don't have to come back. I mean, oh, Jesus, sorry. It really depends. What we've got to ask if somebody's neurodivergent is we've got to ask is what's that neurodivergent for you? How does that present? What happens to you? How do you want me to communicate with you? What does that mean? Especially in fucking polyamory and kink. Is this person consenting in the same way that I'm hearing it? Is this person consenting or about this? No offence, please, if you're going to talk, can you go that way? Thank you. No offence, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm about to be rude. It probably is offensive, and I still mean it. So it's a difficult one. We have to learn to communicate clearly, and a lot of people take offence at clear communication. So when somebody is neurodivergent and says, wait, you're fat, how dare you talk to me like that? But we assume that that person is just saying, because they're neurodivergent, maybe that's their upbringing, it's got fuck all to do. Honesty was the best policy in their family. This is the problem, and it's all about communication. So I think, first of all, in poly and in kink, we have to understand what that neurodiversity and neurotypicalness means in our communication. Can we use it then as an alternative to therapy and an alternative to have some kind of relationship to help us? But to help us do what? Like, that's my question. Like, to do what? To get better, to change, which is bollocks. What is it for you?
So I was thinking more in terms of structure and sort of play and DS roles that are more along the lines of behavioral change and control and structure. Like, basically, the submissive has a structure externally enforced by the dominant that's around certain aspects around their life, like routine,
structure.
habits.
Structure. Okay.
That's mainly what I was thinking of, but I know it can apply to like my secondary thinking was addressing aspects of trauma, but that feels a bit of a cliche at this point. So that's why my brain was mainly thinking about sort of behavioral control and change and structure, and
Really appreciate your clarity and really appreciate you sharing. So thank you. That's the first thing. So if I put structure for you and I start to change your life and you go, fuck me, I feel so much better. This is wonderful. What's the biggest danger? When I leave. Because it probably isn't an if. Statistically, it's more likely to be a when. Anybody here have more than one relationship in their life? More than 2? More than 3? Do you see what I'm saying? How many have got 10 on the go at the moment? No. I remember once doing a poly workshop, this woman said that she had 11 partners. I was like, fucking hell. Why did you just see one a month? Like, come on. Very different idea of poly to me. Okay, I was kind of open and just playing, so very different. My issue is, if we use something, a little bit like the knife blade for self-injury, if we use something to help us feel okay, when it goes, we haven't learned how to feel okay by ourselves. Potentially, if it has created a long enough behavioural change, how much time does it take to make a habit?
2 weeks.
That's what everybody says. Does research back that up?
no.
3 months and 3 days is an average to change your behaviour. However, it isn't your whole life. Anyone here ever done a diet? You don't go over it, right? So we try a diet, don't we? Right, tomorrow I'm going to eat 1,200 calories. I'm going to drink 3 litres of water. I'm not going to touch a cake. I'm not going to touch a packet of crisps. Fuck that Coke shit. I'm drinking 3 litres of water. Watch me. I'm going to go to the gym 4 times a week. I'm going to start bench pressing, whatever it is. I don't give a shit. We get into this really interesting thing that says we're changing everything. Does it work? Because you're trying to change too much at once. I had I've got 4 daughters. I realised what was happening. After the 4th time of having sex, I said, no more. That's not true. Although one of my second youngest once sat at the breakfast table, and my ex-in-laws were there, and he was a reverend in a free church. I mean, imagine being around me. But he was a reverend in a free church, and she was terribly religious. It was very important to her. Dresses came to certain levels. She was, like, it was really important stuff. And my second youngest, Brian, she said, she went, we've been talking about something to do with sex, and I give a frank answer to my children, very structural, very factual, not too big, basic, and then we build, which comes to this point as well. You build, you have a little bit of information, and then you build. If somebody asks me what a blowjob is and they're 8, I'm going to give them a very different answer to 28. So what's appropriate? So we've been talking about something the night before, and I just watched Brian's mind whirring. You know when you watch a kid and they're going, Mummy, yes, darling. You poor thing. And I went, oh, why? You had to do it 4 times. I've got 4 daughters. I'm like, yeah, that's true. Bless her. So it's really interesting what we do. So the problem with all of this is that the basis of structure can be really good if we've got one small thing where we start to make a change. And when one of my daughter's partners and nieces lived with me for a while because she was stuck, she didn't have anywhere to go, I'm very much a come in. You haven't got anywhere for Christmas? Come to mine. Oh God, that stuff has bit me on the arse before. I remember 2 Kinksters I got to really know here, and I've got my parents and my daughters at the dinner table, and they're there as well, and we were talking about some kind of game about the last night, and we were trying to get things through. He said to her, what you did last night? She went, suck your cock. And I was like, come. Full gag. Oh, now I'm out, but at the dinner table at Christmas, I'm not sure I'm that fucking out anymore. It was quite interesting to go, oh my gosh. And luckily my kids are pretty good about that sort of thing. They were like, fuck it now. Typical mum. The problem with these habits is if I change one small thing for you, that might be really good. It's a habit that you get into. If I try and change too much too fast, it's not going to work long term. We need to create good habits. And this knee said, Deb, will you help me lose weight? I'm a qualified nutritionist, by the way, that doesn't mean a lot. It doesn't, rather than a diet. It doesn't. The same as personal training. I'm really sorry. Please check those person's qualifications. How long have they been doing it? What do they genuinely know? I know personal trainers that have caused anorexia more than once.
Throwing on the shade today, aren't you?
I am. But it doesn't mean a lot. You can become a nutritionist after a weekend course. Can I just point that out? You can become a therapist after a weekend course. They're not protected terms. Any of you ask me my qualifications? Do people ask me my qualifications in my room? Nearly never. Really shocking. Now, you can't get insured unless you're qualified, so I would always ask them about their insurance. That's one of the first things. Because some people who are very non-qualified are fucking brilliant. And some people who've got a shit ton of qualifications are fucking terrible. Like, it's so find out about the person. And I said to her, yeah, I can help you, so let's look at that. And I used to work for a group called Weight Matters. I was the clinical supervisor and training director of an eating disorders clinic in London for 5 years. And she said, great, when can we get started? And I said, let's just start now. So we did some psychological stuff, not as a therapist, just a little bit of help, because you have to start with the head. And then I said, all I want you to do for the next 2 weeks is just drink probably around 1.5 to 2 litres of water every day. That's it. Just do that for a couple of weeks. Or is that fucking it? Yeah, it is. How the fuck is that going to help me? What she wants is she wants the answers tomorrow. She wants to have lost 4 stone tomorrow. She wants to change everything, and we all know statistically that doesn't work. So if we change everything for a human being, it ain't going to work long term, especially if it's based on somebody else. And I think what COVID taught us was doing online therapy way before. A lot of my colleagues were like, you shouldn't be doing that, and I'm all doing it now. So it's still really effective and impactful. Most of my clients I see online. And it still works. You can't change everything about a human being in one hit. And do you even want to? How much do you lose of who you are and what that means? So if we're going to make changes for somebody who's maybe neurodivergent, wants safety in habits and different things, it's small things. If we change their lives. I had a client with very severe, what you would probably call borderline personality disorder, what I would call emotionally unstable personality disorder nowadays. So if you're somebody who's got BPD or EUPD, If you are on like quite extreme, so you could argue that the typhoids don't even matter. What we're talking about, some kind of serious trauma in their lives from many years ago. The typhoids don't matter. This person was having a really hard time about how they lived and what they were doing. Therapy every week, sometimes twice a week, lots of contact in between. Anyone who's got EPD needs. And that's okay, I work with that, because eventually what you do see is you watch that drop off as they start to feel okay, as they're understanding themselves. The life experience changes. Met this person, oh my God, they're completely in love. Life is brilliant now. They've got their routines. They're doing a mantra every night before they go to bed. They're doing a mantra when they wake up in the morning. They've got a set routine of how they make coffee for the person. So their whole life is now structured and feels of value. Guess what happened? She disappeared from therapy. I chased her up on it. I'm not going to chase up twice. People are waiting to see me. That's okay. And I care about this person. I've been seeing her for quite a few years. A personality disorder in therapy, 4 to 8 years. Not 6 fucking weeks. Sorry, not 6 to 8 weeks. You might make some behavioural changes, but long term, everything's going to come back. Really spoke to us, like, disappears. 2 years later, can you help me? My whole fucking life has imploded and exploded, and I'm even on the streets. Because she gave up everything for this structure and this routine. Heartbreaking to hear. Easily done. We think we're madly in love. We give up our rent. We move in with someone. We change everything. This person wasn't working. Doesn't matter. He's taking care of her. It's all lovely. Where's your safety long term? So when we make massive changes because we feel in a certain way, what we really need to ask as well is this of benefit to me long term? If this person disappeared out of my life, what if this would stay? And if it's about the person and the structure, I'm going to argue it hasn't done you any favours. If you can hold on to some of the habitual changes, they might be really beneficial to you. And that's where power exchange and DS can be really lovely. But does full power exchange really exist? That's an interesting one as well, isn't it? If I told you to do this, if you want to do it, you'll do it. If I tell you to go and punch her in the face, you're unlikely to. You might know her, but but it depends, doesn't it? It's about what you ask, isn't it? Yeah. And we can try and say, yeah, but they're not going to ask me to jump off the pier, or they, for fuck's sake. I don't know. Have you ever had a really long-term relationship with somebody who's then found out to be a paedophile or done something? You'd be very surprised at what the partners very slowly get coerced into over years of grieving and years of time or different situations. So we do a lot of things for love. If you speak to, how many people know here? Well, I'm sure you all know this. You've got somebody who's been put in prison for the most horrific crimes. What do they get? Fan mail. And through that fan mail, what do they end up doing? They get married to some of these people because that's the obsession. So, we get to know people really over 3 to 6 months, but it doesn't mean we really know them. Who here has an ex that they would have bet their life would never have done what they did? Quite a few people. We thought, oh no, I didn't think they would ever do that. I didn't think they would ever say that, but they do. People do sometimes. So we've just got to be a little bit careful about how much trust and how quickly we put into someone. Because really what we're doing there is, I want you to do this for me so I feel better. My question is, how do you do it for yourself? How do we enable you to do that so you put the habits in that are good for you as a human being? How do you become beholden to that for yourself? And I'm not saying that shit is easy, because it's fucking not. It is really hard. But that is the key to change. If you've got somebody who's really good as someone on a power exchange relationship, that can be really amazing. It can really work. But it's all dependent on that person as well, what they want. Because the little things can be destroyed long term as well if they're not particularly nice or they change something. And also, who here has been in a power exchange relationship that's lasted more than 8 years? 5 years. Did it stay power exchange all the way up until the end? When did the power exchange start to disappear?
Around second.
Yeah. Honeymoon period. A lot of people who are into power exchange are very high in power exchange. Then as soon as, especially if it's connected to sex, when it starts to drop off, you start to get into regular routine, the power exchange starts to disappear. And that's statistically very high. Very high. I find that fascinating. I want power exchange in my relationships, but the amount of relationships I've had over a long time where that's dissipated heavily after 18 months to 3 years, that honeymoon, it varies for people, It's like, God, what happened there? I still want this. Where's it gone? So that's the danger as well, long term. What if the other person doesn't want to do it anymore? I met this master and slave relationship, been together for 20 years, but they weren't really doing MS anymore. And he was saying, I'm so fucking fed up with it. She comes home, she wants me to do all of this. You know, she wants me to be in charge. I'm too fucking tired. I've got a business that I'm trying to sort out.
I'm making sure you don't need another Coke, because it's a long one today.
Oh, I'd love a glass of water, please.
Glass of water? I will get that.
See, MS.
It's that day of the year,
Don't
innit?
tell him when he comes in. But, you know. So it's or is that good dominance? He's not my dominant. He and I have never. I've known him for 20 years. And I disagree with a lot of things. It's like, all women really? So we argue about, especially we argue about orgasms, we argue about quite a lot of things. It's quite funny. It's a little wearying, but it's quite funny. But that's really caring, isn't it? So caring, dominance can be caring as well. It's about thinking and caring for somebody else. But people lose that interest sometimes after a while. I've got a sore bum from sitting.
Sorry.
Stand up for a second, shake it out. Or not, that is. It is a bit longer today. So, I mean, and if anyone's bored and hates this, please feel free. I don't. Do you know what I mean? It's no difference to me. I come and do this and I don't get paid for it. This is something I do for people, but that's good for me. So, it feeds my ego. Let's go there. So, and it's really important to understand that when we have long-term habits, that can be really good for us that we start to change them. Thank you so much.
Just in case you want to drown yourself.
Isn't it nice to perform an act of service for someone?
Come on, children, get a room.
Never. So, never.
She won't have anything to do with me.
I wonder why.
Is it saying he doesn't have to do
Of course.
it? So what we've got to do is be really careful about that sort of act. I say the same about trauma, because when we then go into stuff, we think this is really fixing me, this is healing me. Am I doing it for me and is it working for me inside out? Or is the other person doing it for me and I depend on them and it's not working in the same way? Will this have a long-term effect? If you go for some CBT and you think in 6 weeks your trauma is going to be fixed, it's not. Because if you think about, I talk about people like houses. If you have something that's very, and I do CBT, I love, not our kinky CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. That's the truth though, isn't it? These acronyms are easily confused if you're kinky. Come on, who's looked at 6 sessions of CBT and gone, oh no, some of you have. So it might change, and CBT can be really impactful and effective and fantastic. I love it, I use it, it's really good. Will it change someone's whole life? Yes, it could do, depending on why they're coming to talk to me. So it could be really effective, really impactful. And it depends on how that person uses that form of particular therapy rather than having their cock and balls. That can change their lives too. We're not allowed to be invisible. I do psychosexual psychotherapy, and the people that say, can you show me? No. I can give you a diagram, that's about it. Could you help my erectile? Yes, of course I can, but not in the way you're thinking. So it's really important to understand that if we do something that's around cognition, that's like changing the soft furnishings in a house, it can make you feel really good and it can make you feel fantastic and it'll work for a while. Now, some people do cognitive behavioural therapy on a deeper level. It's got more relational stuff and behavioural change and emotional change going on with it. So I'm not talking about somebody who does that. And if it's just, what do you want to change? Let's change it. There you go. You're changed, off you go. That can be really impactful and effective on somebody's life. However, if you've got a damp problem or you've got your house cracking, it's still not okay. So maybe we fix that, or we take that wall down and we extend the property and we do something so we're getting more behavioural, we're getting a little bit deeper now. Great. If your foundations are fucked, it's still not going to work. And feelings are foundations. Children are born with feelings. Happy, angry, sad, scared, contempt, disgust, surprise. Plus the epigenetics and the genetics. They then become behavioural. Have you noticed if you've got a really little baby, I was holding a 9-week-old baby yesterday at cheer competition. Bless it, had ear defenders on and everything. It's shiny. This little thing pressed with ear defenders. But when she was awake, I was just sticking my tongue out at her, and even at 9 to 10 weeks, she was just sticking her tongue back out at me. There's a connection that you have as a human being with a child. It's a connection, it's a discussion, it's a start. However, she will then become cognitive. And that's not now, that's later. But all her neurons in her brain, as soon as she is born, go, and they fire off. They're non-existent before, not in the same way that we have them, they are there. But how they then work is incredible once birth starts to happen. You can look up a YouTube video on it, it's amazing. Look at what happens in the brain when a baby's born. Boom, all this information. And we used to think that it stopped. We used to think that when a baby got older, it stopped. It doesn't. If you are nursing a child, regardless of your gender, because you could be feeding, both of your neurons are firing off as you're doing that. And they're still happening later. Even at 57, mine might be a little bit slower, but they're still happening. And the more I challenge myself or learn a language or learn something, the more they're happening. And we know that goes against things like Alzheimer's and other things as well. We carry on. So there's always a capacity for us to learn. And it's got to be more feeling based. And if we're neurodivergent, sometimes attaching or going to that feeling is really difficult. We also know from the latest piece of research from Australia, which is a huge extensive piece of research into ASD, is that if a child has a slightly different form of parenting for their first 18 months, their symptoms for ASD will lessen, if not half. That is shocking. Don't you think that's shocking? I think that's really shocking, because what we're getting is a different connection. If we understand the baby's needs, if the baby's needs that are met are good enough, if we go back to Winnicott as a behavioural scientist, psychologist from around, even when around I was born, have people heard of attachment theory? People like Winnicott? If you look at what was happening, Winnicott was around at that time. So around the same time as Bowlby and Ainsworth, who were talking about attachment theory. Winnicott was around. He was the one that said, these children aren't healing very well when I put them in hospital. I wonder why. Because aren't children biologically supposed to heal a lot more rapidly? And they weren't. But their parents were visiting them at 4 o'clock for half an hour every day, and then they would leave them in this hospital. There were no parental stayovers, no long-term visits for children in hospital. They were just in these beds, looked after by a very perfunctory matron. Here, half your fantasies, I'm sure. Very perfunctory matron and nurse and a doctor. He was always a man, of course he was, no white coat, in those times. Thankfully, things have changed. So what's happened eventually is he realised that if I let people sleep here, I wonder if it will change the parents. So they did some experiments in some hospitals. Parents came in with the babies. Guess what? The babies and children halved their time of needing to stay in the hospital. And then he thought, fuck me, these parents must be amazing. Have I picked an amazing bunch of parents? No. What the research found, which was one of my favourite statements when it comes to parenting, is still Winnicott's, is good enough. You need a good enough dominant. You need a good enough submissive. You need a good enough parent. You only need one. You don't need two. As a single parent, I'm going to fucking go for that one. You just need one. And they've got to be good enough. You've got to have other people potentially in your life that are good enough, that help you grow and help you change. So we need a good enough dominant if that's going to happen. And that's quite complex because a lot of people aren't good enough. Who here has ever met a really shitty human? Yeah. Anyone here dating? Well, you're going to meet a lot more, right? People aren't, we're quite selfish. And COVID has changed us quite a lot as well. We're even more self-orientated. A little, certainly, it's an interesting shift. I mean, for example, the level of sexually transmitted illnesses, diseases, whatever you want to call it, is up to you, I can't remember the exact figures. I was reading this the other day. Sorry, I can't remember the exact figures. It's too much in my head. What's interesting is they then dropped off to near enough nothing during COVID, of course, because of lockdowns and stuff. Well, some of you still did it, didn't you? Right? So, but what's interesting is we haven't just gone back to that. We've doubled the amount of what was before. Wow, what an opportunity we've just missed. We could have nearly got rid of fucking gonorrhea, chlamydia, all of these things could have been decreased massively if we then went out and said, I know, I'm going to say sex after this. That's a really good idea for me to do. No. What we did is we fucked and we fucked and we fucked and boom, it's gone right back up again. And actually, the instances of things like gonorrhea, which can be really frightening, there's a few others as well, becoming antibiotic resistant and are still very dangerous, can actually kill us still. Some of them. You've got to be careful. What a shame. We could have absolutely changed all the figures if we'd have just thought a little bit differently, but we didn't because we're quite selfish. So if we're going to look at somebody doing that for us, I would rather you didn't rely on somebody else. I would rather you learn how to do it for yourself with guidance, with some help maybe. Or if you do meet a dominant that's going to do that, have some structure, that's great. But when I leave you, it's gone. Or when you leave me, it's gone. And what I don't want is if, because I picked on you, for example, if this, I don't know your gender identity.
Oh, just female thing.
Okay, if she turned round and then said, I want to leave you, but I can't because I know what you're doing with me keeps me safer, she's just lost some of her consent and choice as well. So she's staying for the wrong reasons. And that's not good either. I feel safe in this. She's a cunt. I feel safe in this. I don't like this person or what they're doing, or they've been unfaithful if we're not poly. Anyone here who thinks poly people are naturally faithful? That's also a bit of a fallacy. People still lie. Poly doesn't make us safer. We still have to do poly effectively with fucking good communication, with respect and care for other human beings. People still cheat in poly. I remember waking up once, cut queen poly. One of my partners was in a shower, and he said, oh, my phone's gone, can you answer it? Pick it up. It's a message. Can't wait to be with you. I'm so glad you haven't told Deb yet. Dan? Colour drains from this whole system. Well, I know, but I was going to tell you. What? Going to tell me what? Are you leaving? You can leave if you want. That's okay. I mean, you get a lot more from this relationship than I do, mate. I was a bit bitter, but but you can sleep with others when you're with me. I don't really understand what you're doing and why you've done it. I'm so sorry. Please let me stay with you. I love you. Oh, complex shit. So we still have to be honest. We still have to be kind. But we just have to be aware of this sort of stuff because it goes on everywhere. And if we create habits with new people, which are great, what if they leave or don't want to leave for the wrong or right reasons? That's one of the questions that I would have. And when we're recreating trauma, the problem is when you read all the experts on trauma, of which there are quite a few that you can look at, you can do courses. There's also people that are really good at trauma. My favourite personal couple are Mandical and Daniel Siegel. They're two of my favourites. They're the people I always go to and read. And you can do courses. They do all sorts of stuff. By the way, anyone here a therapist or works in some kind of mental health? You don't have to admit it.
I'm training as well.
Awesome. Okay. What you'll find in a general training is most people aren't taught about trauma. It might be a weekend or something. So if you have trauma, what I would always say to anyone who's trained to be a therapist is go on and do another course on trauma afterwards. It should be standard. When I did a psychosexual psychotherapy course, guess how much time we spent on poly and BDSM? 1 day out of 2 years. 2 years. So you go to a psychosexual specialist who's a specialist in couples and relationship therapy. If you are poly, alternative, LGBTQ, whatever, they've got 1 day's worth of knowledge. Wow.
Great.
I mean, ask people. It's really important. So I think, and also it's not always courses, because some people teach courses. I remember sitting on that one going, that's wrong. And then I created an environment where everyone started coming to me for all the answers. And then they were annoyed about that. And I was saying, yeah, but you're talking about stuff, your texts are from the 1970s. That book is, at least have the updated edition, because they've put additions into it. Or they're teaching something, you're like, oh my God. So, learning is really handy. It's really good. It's really good to do. I find it quite shocking that your average therapist isn't actually trauma trained at all. None. Might have done a weekend. And yet, aren't we saying that everybody's traumatized nowadays? Isn't that what we're saying? In some way, shape or form?
Yes.
We are. That's what we're saying. It may be true or not, but that is definitely where we're going. So why aren't we teaching every single therapist trauma training? Don't understand it. It's very interesting. So I think to make those changes is a big deal, and trauma is such a big deal. And we remember trauma on a cellular level, even if we don't remember it from a memory perspective. The way trauma is experienced tends to stay on the top. If this is like a filter system, the trauma doesn't go through. So when you're working with someone to try and help them with a trauma, the reason it takes ages is because number one, they have to trust you. Number two, they have to trust the techniques that you're going to give them. And number three, they have to almost, not fully re-experience the trauma, but they have to integrate it before they can get rid of it. So my favourite way is saying you have to eat it and shit it out, and that's not very good. You've got to let it go through. Whereas most of us deal with trauma by leaving it somewhere else. That's what trauma's about. We've left it somewhere else. It's here on our brains. So this sort of stuff can be traumatizing as well. We get someone who changes us and then they leave us. Oh my God, what message does that give you? Well, you weren't right. You weren't good enough. You weren't okay. If your self-esteem isn't very high, your self-belief isn't very high, you don't think that they did something wrong. You think that you did something wrong. And in BDSM, in theory, we have more trust. We have better communication. I mean, who the fuck wrote that once? Because it's taken up all the time. Pamela Stevenson did some research into us as human beings, and apparently we're so much better at communication. Are we? Where did we learn that then? The only reason we think we're good at communication is we have to negotiate how to play with somebody. And a lot of us get that wrong as well. One of my favourite questions, if I'm about to play with someone, yeah, it's probably appropriate. If I'm about to play with someone, one of my favourite questions is, when you had a scene go wrong, what did you do? Anyone ever asked that one?
What are your fuck-ups?
Bring it into your question. It's the best question to ask. Because if they turn around and say, I've never had anything go wrong. What, never? Never. How long have you been doing this? Like a therapist, actually. Anyone here been in therapy at all? You don't have to tell me, but anyone here, like, okay, so some people have. Did you ever turn around and say to your therapist, how many years have you been practicing?
Yes.
Wrong question. Do you know why? Because if they have 2 clients a week, it's very different to having 40 clients a week. My question is, how many hours of practice do you have? That's the one to remember next time you go. And how many questions and how many hours of personal therapy have you had? To be a counsellor, you have 2 years at 40 hours each. So that's 80 hours. That's not a lot in a journey. You're really shocked. 80 fucking hours, I've done more than that myself. And if you see a psychotherapist, they have to have done 4 years of the same, so that's 160. Put the 2 together, you start to hit what I would consider better awareness and a journey. So my question is if I'm seeing a therapist is, how many hours of experience do you have? Do you have a supervisor? I mean, that's not legal, you don't have to, really. You can get away with next to no supervision nowadays. You can on a supervisor. Them's the rules. It doesn't mean anything to me if you're registered with the BACP or the UKCP or COSRA. I don't give a flying fuck. They don't monitor you. They don't work with you properly. You just write an essay and they tell you whether you're okay or not. If you've already done an accredited course, why do you have to write an essay to become more accredited? You're not more accredited. It's exactly the same. It's this self-fulfilling business prophecy. Until the UK puts in a system and says, this is held by the government, you think by seeing a BACP accredited counsellor or therapist, that's government related? It isn't. It's got nothing to do with the government. Over here, they're not licensed words. Anyone can call themselves a therapist, a counsellor, or a psychotherapist. The protected words are psychiatrist and psychologist. And a psychologist might not be able to help you because they're not a therapist. It's quite shocking, isn't it? But a psychologist will charge you £180, £150 a session. Whereas a therapist will charge you anywhere from £20, I have a serious worry if someone's going to charge you £20, to 200. Varies where they work, what they're doing and what's happening. So again, protected terms, please be careful, especially around trauma. So when we recreate trauma, if it's on a cellular level, it might go well for a while it's healing us. There was a woman here 7 years ago. She used to do lots of demos, especially around choking. She was choked, she was blacked out on a regular basis on stage. Your face, what? I mean, it's really dangerous to be blacked out on a regular basis. You don't know, so the older you get, the worse it is to black someone out. Do you know that's a problem with age? So if you're into choking, it's much riskier for me than it is for you at your age. Much riskier. Do you know what you're doing? How are you choking that person out? Are we talking about blood? Are we talking about air? What are we talking about? What method are you using? And she was re-traumatizing because she had something happen to her many years ago that was related to trauma. One day I will take a sip of that. So, and what happened was and she said to me, oh, it's done wonders for my trauma. I'm completely healed. I said, if ever it goes wrong and you have a panic attack, just get someone to get me on the radio. Just let me know. Took 3 years, full blown, shaking. I don't think anyone was here at the time. I don't think you were here. It was quite a few years ago, but it was absolutely horrific. It was horrible. And I said, please, will you go and get some proper therapy? So that's my problem with that as well. And she did, and that's great. So we all vary. Right, so anyone got a final question that they would like to ask or something they would like to think about or share before we finish?
This is related to the second to last question. And I was wondering about if your partner consumes a kind of porn that you might be uncomfortable with. So particularly I'm thinking of girl on girl porn, as it's called, which seems to be incredibly common.
What, men who like lesbians?
Yeah.
Shocking.
And I think the reason I'm asking is because I understand that lesbian porn is actually the most popular category in UK, in America, and has been for around 5 years. And I've also heard of certain instances where queer couples have been attacked because, refusing to kiss, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's happened.
And
2 girls on a bus last year.
yes, yeah, that's what I was thinking of. And I think, like with the last question, I think it comes down to context, individual, how it's done. But I think the consumption of queer relationships for cis male pleasure is something that I find quite challenging. I was wondering how to negotiate that if you're with someone who enjoys that.
Well, it also goes the other way, because actually male gay porn is the most watched porn by heterosexual women on average, not always. This isn't everybody all the time, but that's when you see a lot of cock, right? So more so. And I've got to say, cis heterosexual porn is just all about very fast, violent penetration, and it's pretty fucking boring, isn't it? I mean, if I'm sleeping with someone and all I'm doing is kind of in a still position while they're just doing this for 3 hours, I'm not with them anymore. I'm bored, I'm done my shopping list, I'm dry, I'm hurting. And if I'm with a woman who does the same, like, oh, I'm going to fish you, and you're like, half an hour later, you're like, okay, well, I won't be able to walk for a week, and I'm not really having a great time. We can't do it, not without lube, not without a lot of care for other human beings. Stuff like that is always going to get brought into it. I mean, it's even more uncomfortable if you then start to look into the figures around pornography, because one of the most searched for pornography terms after that is actually teen. We like them young. We go from young girls, that's it, we're straight in there. That's the one of it. So there is a real problem with it. I think we can have an ethical and moral stance on what we think is okay, and we can bring that into our relationships. Ex-Hamster and a couple of the others have just started taking out a lot of homemade porn. I don't know if you know this, if anyone's a porn or avid porn watcher or reader, depending on what sort of pornography you like. It's shifted again in the last 6 months. A lot of it's been taken away. So that homemade stuff that was being made is starting to disappear. So we're still left with very unethical, cis hetero, male-led pornography. I think that's always going to happen. One of the most common fantasies for cis-born women is rape. It's the most common fantasy for a cis-born heterosexual woman to have is rape. The most common fantasy for your cis-born man is a threesome. And is that because that's what society says? Is it because that's what's conditioned and we're told, oh mate, 2 women, fuck, yeah, go, kiss it, do it. It's such a fantasy for a lot of people. Is it because that's passed down and it's because of what we watch? Or I have a very simple cure for America right now. I really do. When you look at the whole abortion laws and you look at everything else that's all trying to, it's all overturning. We're just going to keep women. We are turning into some kind of fucking Margaret Atwood novel. We're going to be wearing red capes and have white hats soon. A little bit of a feminist, sorry. I'm not sorry for that at all. So we're turning into this very strange society again. Stop having sex with men. I can't tell you how quickly those laws will all come back. I mean, I think rape and lots of force will go up as well. You're not going to stop the odd person. The problem with rape or sexual violence isn't because the person wants sex, actually. It is not a sex-based crime. It is a crime of power. So rape happens because of power and attacks on women and men, actually. And I mean, God, if you are a trans black woman, you are the most murdered woman on the planet. You're the most murdered human on the planet, with violence that goes with it. Fucking horrific. So we have instances that happen for different reasons. It's about power. It's about culture with a big C. It's about culture with a small c. So different cultures respond differently to people who are going to transition, people's sexuality, people's gender identity. I remember being in Egypt and seeing these two women just having such a great time. I went, oh my God, is this your honeymoon or your marriage? And I went, how did you know? Actually, maybe I overstepped the boundary there. I then went, fuck, I don't think I should have said that actually. They were so obviously together. Sisters don't have matching towels, okay? They don't. Occasionally they might do, but they don't have matching flip-flops, matching whatever. Couples do that. They were obviously a couple, but they were obviously trying to hide it. And I said, do you know what, I've just overstepped. I'm so sorry, that might have been a boundary for you. And I just realised I fucked up. They went, no, oh my God, it's so refreshing for you to say that, but it's so lovely. We're just a bit worried because we're aware of the violence here. And I said, why did you come here? I said, well, I mean, you're quite safe within this environment. They're not going out to town and doing different things. So depending on the culture that you live in as well, and the country that you live in, there are still many countries, there's over, I think it's 98 countries that still don't even allow any form of LGBTQI, where it's a heinous crime where you could get murdered for it. 98, it's something around that. Someone might be able to refresh me on that figure, but it's something around that. I don't know if we're going to stop it. It's the same sort of answer. So I see I think the questions are different, but the answers are terribly similar. In that, well, if you like the idea of a big bar going up and being tied up, you're currently turned on. Or someone's been really hurt. That might be a thing as well. Yes. So I think we've got to be very careful. I think if you don't like it as a human being in a relationship with somebody else, that then becomes a question of respect and care and whether the other person can see it. However, what I'm also going to add is if somebody has watched a certain type of porn for a very long time, the likelihood of them just stopping it is very low because that's what they consume. If you watch some other people who come to me with, especially if we start talking about penis owners, with erectile issues, with turn-on issues, whether they don't come, whether they're anorgasmic or whether they come too fast, any of those things, it's the association. Anyone here ever slept with somebody who's a penis owner and says, oh, okay, that's a very specific form of wanking. Is that what makes you come? Actually, for me, I like, is this a bit too personal? Let's go for it. And I like, it's a form of therapy, isn't it? Therapist, right? So, I don't, if you go straight for my clitoris, I'm at the end of the bed. I'm not a shoe-shine girl. I'm sorry, if you rub it like that, that's uncomfortable. I don't like it. It hurts. I mean, I'm off, there they go, you must go have a good time. Because at the end, no, I'm fucking trying to get away from your fingers. It's ridiculous. I like certain circles in a certain way, slightly above, with a certain amount of pressure. We get into habits of how we orgasm. And that's not actually always a beneficial thing. If you always hold your cock in a certain way, or always put a finger up your arse in a certain way, or watch one thing, we get very habitual in what we do. Now that can be really uncomfortable for some people. Oh, okay. Doesn't that hurt? I mean, that might be the idea, but does that do something for you? Like if someone's really slow and gentle, you're like, oh, because it might be different to what we've seen in pornography as well and what we've been taught. So we just have to be aware of, if it's in a personal situation and we're with somebody, I think you have a right as a human being to say, I'm not comfortable with that. But as soon as you say that, what are the consequences you're willing to live with? What boundaries are you going to put in place? If you have kids and you turn around and say to that child something along the lines of, if you do that again, I'm going to flush your fucking head down the toilet. Are you prepared to see that through? I mean, I would hope not. Tempting. I've had 4 daughters. Any parent who says I haven't at one stage sort of murdering my child or creating some kind of violence is probably telling some kind of lie. It's really difficult to be a parent and no one teaches you how to do it. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. That said, that child didn't ask to be born. You chose to have the child. That's your shit. You sort it out. Easier said than done. So you've got to be prepared to live with a consequence that you put. I see a lot of kids who, I definitely want to write a piece on self-diagnoses. I think there used to be something called Munchausen's by proxy. Have you heard of that? Or Munchausen's. And then we've got other things along the lines of, we don't call it that anymore, we call it fabricated illness and fabricated illness by proxy. But there's also this thing going on around, it's not fabricated illness, but it's this self-diagnosis that gets fulfilled. It's like a prophecy. The amount of kids I see, oh, I've got anxiety. Have you? Like, how do you know that? Did you, like, who did you see? Well, I've read about it. Okay. Or my mum says I have. I see a lot of that. My mum says I have. And so these conditions that we're putting on children around all of these things, we just get used to fulfilling prophecies. And porn can do that for people. But also, so can the consequences. Children need boundaries, they need consequences, they need to learn, and they need lots of love. So do all human beings. Then the question becomes, is if you love yourself enough, but you don't want to live with someone watching that kind of porn, are you willing to walk away? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to come in. If you have those boundaries, if it's for a friend, that's so complex, isn't it? Because you can't. Are they willing to walk away? If they're not, do you then say, well, don't come to me with this problem, or it's my problem because I'm the one seeing it? If you're going to put a boundary in place, are you going to stick to it? Because someone will walk all over your boundaries when you start to give in on them. They just keep going. Well, okay, just, I don't really want you to watch it again. You catch them. I think saying to someone, I don't want you watching it again isn't good enough. I think you have to say, I don't like this. This is the impact it has on me. I understand that this is a choice. This is why I think ethically that's not okay. Are you on board with me politically and culturally about that? Because if not, we might have some issues in the way we see life. I'm probably not going to go out with a Trump photo. Probably. I'm probably not going to see somebody who isn't a feminist in some way, shape or form. Although ironically, there's me saying, beat the shit out of me. My choice as a woman. I've earned that choice because this is who I am. I don't need you to pay for me. I'm very successful. Thank you very much. I don't need you to look after me. I'm completely capable of doing that by myself. I've worked hard to get where I am. But that's my choice. And that's the difference. So are you willing to put the consequences in place? Because that's the first question I would ask you, because that's when the problems start to come in. So it's good to have ethics, but if you're then not willing to live through them, it's really hard. If someone starts cheating on you or does something and then you turn around and say, well, just this time is fine, but then the next time is fine. It's like battery, it's like assault. It just escalates. So it's all about what boundaries are you willing to put in place. That's what it is for me. Thank you very much for your time. I'm not here next month. I am here the month after, and then every month after that, so until Christmas. So thank you. It's been a long one. I really appreciate your time, and if you ever think of any questions, you can drop them down for me. You can send them to me. I'll cover them on Thursdays if you want to come along. If you want to follow me as the Kink Shrink on FetLife, please do. I've got over 640 writings, and it's all about this sort of stuff. I write a lot. And if you come to a Thursday, it's CPD. Go and unnumb your bums. Thank you.